Welcome to PJFM in Conversation. I'm Elizabeth Nonemaker, freelance music critic for the Baltimore Sun, and it's my pleasure to welcome Aryeh Shalom, the composer, writer, and director for Exile and Redemption, a NEO-HASIDIC rock opera. Aryeh, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be had.
So just to start, can you describe Exile and Redemption for us in your own words?
I have absolutely no idea what it's about. It surprises me every day. I can't even, I don't even know how it got finished. You tell me, what do you think it's about?
I mean, obviously it's a rock opera. I kind of want to ask you some questions about that too, which is that
like, take 25.
But I think, one of the things that's interesting to me is that you have this album, watching it, it kind of plays out more like a visual album. And so maybe we can start there and kind of break it down. What was the idea? Did the idea for the album come first and then you wanted to devise this film to go along with it? Kind of walk me through the steps of coming up with the idea and then executing it.
Originally, Exile and Redemption was a conceptual album, essentially a synthesis of all the essential ideas that inspired me to lead a more traditional lifestyle. I grew up secular here in Philadelphia, and I don't know, it's all about sex, drugs, rock and roll. I had, it was always just about me. I had no really self-awareness other than immediate gratification. And so I found myself in England after high school. I was studying musical theater, and it was in London. So the thing about London is it's really depressing. It rains a lot. It's just gray, overcast, and I don't know. I was smoking a lot of hashish at the time.
As you do in London.
As you do in London, apparently. And one day, I don't know if it was the drugs or the terrible weather, terrible food. No offense to anybody from England. You have amazing theater. I had an existential crisis. I realized that one day I was gonna die. And sort of like the Neo awakening in the Matrix, and it was this existential dread, and I realized, you know what, if I'm gonna die, I should probably figure out why I'm here. See if there's any purpose or meaning to life, and I started traveling, and there was this idea that I was gonna go to Israel after high school. I had this amazing experience when I was 16, and it was like a teen tour, and it was the first time that I really identified with our people on a cultural level, on a national level, not so much on a religious level. And there was an amazing sense of community, and I wanted to experience more of that after high school. Didn't want to go to college. It was when the school newspaper came out at the end of the year, it was listing where every but he was going to school and, Ivy League college after Ivy League college. And then, when it came to my name, it said, Israeli freedom fighter. I think I had just read Leon Uris's Exodus. And ironically, the character who I was named after, my mom named me Ari Ben Cohen, and the main character is Ari Ben Canaan. He works for Mossad Aliyah Bet, and he's, this is after World War II, and there, a lot of Jews are being held on Cyprus, and there's a British blockade, and so his job is to try to get Jews into Eretz Yisrael. And so that book really inspired me. And so after high school, though, the Gulf War broke out, and my parents were like, "Yeah, I don't think it's a good idea for you to go to Israel." So I, went. So they sent me to London instead. I don't know. I got tired of the whole theater scene. I felt like it was, slightly vapid. And I wanted to do something more for myself. And
were you involved in the theater scene? Were you acting and performing, or were you just kind of absorbing all of the art that was there?
Studying. I was studying at the time. I had done a lot of musical theater in high school. And I felt like, I didn't want to act. I wanted to, I didn't want to act out somebody else's life. I wanted to create my own story. So I went back home, and I was hanging out with my grandfather in Florida, trying to figure out, I wanted to travel. I wanted to ask the big questions. But I really felt like I needed to start in Israel. That was my original intention. I felt like, there must be some answers there. I was reading a book by I was reading a book by Arthur Miller. It was a collection of plays. And I was reading the story Incident at Vichy, which is about, there are a lot of partisans which were captured by the SS, and they're waiting to be interrogated, and one of them sacrifices his own life in order that the others can escape. And I felt like, even though there was a Gulf War and there were Scuds, flying overhead, and my parents were, really nervous about me going, I felt like if I didn't go then, that I wouldn't feel comfortable going at another point. And so I decided to go to Israel, and it was kind of crazy. My mother, like a typical Jewish mother, she wanted to make sure that I was comfortable, so she went out to the Army Navy store and purchased me a gas mask and a lead-lined suit. Took me to the airport, a little chicken soup. Have fun. Don't forget to put your gas mask on. Don't forget to write. Ironically, when I got to I may be rambling, but I feel like this is an interesting story.
It seems like the lead up is that this Exile and Redemption has been a long time in the making, right?
It was a long time in the making. They were handing out gas masks. How much of the background do you want? I guess I'm telling you the story for the next film. They're handing out gas masks. I threw out my gas mask. Turned out their gas. I thought theirs would be better. Turned out anyway. So I eventually, I was there. I was on kibbutz. I went up on a religious kibbutz. I was asking a lot of questions, and you should go to Yerushalayim. I got to Yerushalayim. I got to Yeshiva Torah. Had a mind-blowing awakening. I didn't think that they would be able to answer my questions. I felt like they did answer my questions beyond a reasonable doubt, and I spent 4 years, studying in Israel, and so I started writing music while I was there, and in order to sort of process, this process all of the information and this renaissance that I was going through. And that's the essentially that's
So it really
that
has
is
been
the backdrop. That's where the music came from, and that
okay.
and that's where and that's the album, Exile and Redemption. That's a synthesis of all the essential ideas that brought me back to Judaism.
So when you do some of these songs actually date back to that time?
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay.
So I started writing while I was in yeshiva. I probably spent more time in my room writing music than I did actually studying in yeshiva, where I was proud, which is
It's
what I
a
was
common
supposed
story
to do.
among a lot of artists.
Yeah,
That they're supposed to be doing something else.
which is what I was supposed to be doing, and yeah, so that's where it began, and I continued that process, when I returned, to the States, and eventually, I sort of curated from, that music, and that's what became Exile and Redemption.
So did you always envision it as something that was paired with a visual story, or was that a separate creative decision?
So that only came later. I the reason why this project took so long is, I was never satisfied, with the end product, and so I just kept on pushing the envelope. And once the album was finished, there was always this idea that I had this story that I wanted to tell for what would be considered the single, and which we did use as the first chapter and story. And
That's the very first
that's
the very first song. Okay.
The very first song, A Little Piece in Our Time. Mm-hmm. And one night I was this album has seen a lot of Taurus. 2 divorces, a manic depressive hospitalization, my mother suffering from ovarian cancer, and eventually passing away. And I think as a result of that, one night I just kind of crashed in my studio and felt like I really didn't have the strength to continue forward. And I looked up and kind of want to hold on 1 second. I was sitting on the floor of my studio. I don't know if you can see this. A little bit of a glare.
Maybe if you can hold it up to the camera a little bit. Oh, it's kind of glaring. Maybe not. Maybe how to hold it back towards you. Oh, yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, that's better.
Like that. And I looked up and I saw this painting. It was a painting that my mother had given me, which was on my studio wall. And it's a painting depicting the Hasidic tale of the Baal Shem Tov, the shepherd boy, and his flute. And the story goes that essentially he was an illiterate shepherd boy, and used to play his flute in the field. And one day he had this overwhelming desire to go to synagogue and to pray to God. And so he gets there, and he doesn't know how to read. So he's unable to use the siddur, the prayer book. And so out of desperation, he decides to pull out his flute and to play the flute in the middle of the synagogue. Now, it turns out that it happens to be Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement, and you're not supposed to be playing a flute on Yom Kippur. And all of the Baal Shem Tov's disciples turn around and they're angry, like, how dare you play a flute, on the holiest day of the year, on Yom Kippur. And the Baal Shem Tov turns around and he smiles and he motions for the shepherd boy to come and play his flute in the front of the synagogue, in front of the Holy Ark. Afterwards, the disciples they're shocked, and they ask the Baal Shem Tov, how could it be? How, why would you let this shepherd boy play the flute on Yom Kippur? And so the Baal Shem Tov smiles and he says, up until the shepherd boy came to play his flute, the gates of heaven were closed to us. But it was his sincere desire to connect to God that finally opened the gates of heaven for us. And I found a lot of chizuk, a lot of strength, in that story. I felt like I was feeling broken. I was feeling alone. I was feeling like I didn't have anything left to contribute to the world. I was feeling like my life didn't matter, and that all of the doors of this world and the next world were closed to me. And it was at that moment, seeing that story, it reminded me that no matter what, no matter how far away, no matter what's happened, no matter what I've done or what I think I've done or think I'm to blame for, or what I am to blame for, that there's this unconditional love, and that's always available. It's always there. All we have to do is reach out and sing or play the flute, whatever it is that we use or anyone uses, to transcend our physical limitations, our reality or supposed reality. And so I felt like at that moment that I didn't want to just share these songs. I didn't want to just share one story. I wanted to share my love, not only my love of Judaism through music, but I wanted to share my favorite Hasidic tales as well, and interfuse them, create a synthesis of my personal life, intertwined with these Hasidic tales. So that's ultimately which I felt like, I don't want just, I've been working on this album for so long also, like I don't want just one song to have a platform. I want each one, each song is meaningful and important to me. I want each one to also have its own story, but I wanted to create something which was cohesive, and I wanted each one to be able to stand on their own, but ultimately have an overall arc and tell one story. And that was the birth of Exile and Redemption, a neo-Hasidic rock opera, visual album or musical film, whatever you want to call it.
I like musical film. Yeah. I'm always really fascinated by artists who take pretty raw personal material and work it into their music or films or art or whatever it is that they do. So I'm wondering if you can reflect on that a little bit. I feel like it's different for every person that does that. Do you feel like you would still write music and make films if you didn't have a kind of personal story to tell? Or I guess what's the relationship between making music and making films and expressing yourself?
I guess for me, it was always a personal cathartic experience. It was almost like I didn't have a choice. I was driven to write music in order to process what I was going through in life, and I always felt like it was a healing process. That it was a balm, an essential balm for my life. So
there are 12 tracks and an epilogue in Exile and Redemption. I have a couple questions about just the filming of it, when it took place, and just, the process of it. But I am curious to hear if you have a favorite track or video, or even a separate favorite track and a separate favorite video.
I think each song really speaks to me in different ways at different times. Ironically, I feel like I wrote this as, I so many of these songs were written decades ago,
Mhm.
and it's almost like I wrote a letter to myself as a reminder to inspire me later on in life at a time when, I was feeling disconnected and
Mhm.
broken. Um, as far as a favorite story, the story that I told about the Baal Shem Tov
Mhm.
and the shepherd boy and his flute, I actually um, retold it from the perspective of a shepherdess, which was my daughter. And my three daughters are in the film,
Mhm.
and
Oh,
instead of
they actually play your daughters.
two of them play my daughters, and one of them plays my granddaughter, the little one. So I like seeing these a few of the Hasidic stories told from a female perspective
Mhm.
as opposed to a male perspective. Um, I think a lot of our stories are um, at times can be um, male centric. I don't know how you would say that. So it's nice to see things from another perspective.
Mhm.
Um, and another one of my favorite stories is about All God's Children, and it shows one of the young kids his as a thief, and he goes to um, and this unconditional love that ultimately he experiences um, from his Rebbe, no matter what.
Mhm.
So I think those are my two favorite stories.
And then what about actually filming it itself? I enjoyed watching the blooper reel at the end. What were what were some of the high points and the low points of this? And I connected to the low points question. Did you actually film this during the pandemic?
No, we had filmed it
Okay,
before the pandemic. It
fortunate.
was finally ready to release by the time the pandemic hit, which was fine. The original intention was actually serendipitous. The original intention was to release uh, each music video separately once a month,
Hmm.
um, and then uh, ultimately to release it on other platforms, whether it's a film festival or on Amazon Prime, to be viewed as a whole. And I also work as a community organizer. So what we did was we would, since we were unable to have um, community, live uh, communal events, we were having these Zoom premieres where we would have thematic conversations based on, the theme of each music video, and we would bring in a guest speaker to talk about, whatever the theme was for that month. So that worked out really well.
Yeah, that's fortunate. So I'll go back to my original question. What were some of the high points and challenges of filming this?
I feel like my entire life is a series of bloopers, um, which is essentially like the main theme of Exile and Redemption. Is that like the whole purpose of existence. We start out with this shattering, right? Like the world's created and you know purposefully shattered,
Hmm.
which gives us the opportunity, to go out and to raise these sparks, and to raise them to a higher level than it would have been if the world would have stayed in this perfect state to begin with.
Hmm.
So you have this process of shattering, and then the raising of the sparks, and and this process of um, reincarnation, in the sense that we're giving multiple opportunities to get it right, no matter what, and uh, ultimately to reach this state of redemption, um, rectification, of tikkun, at the end of days. So yeah, it's all about bloopers. It's all about the bloopers. So because I think that's inspiring in a sense, that which is maybe the reason why I added the bloopers as the epilogue, so to speak. Probably not, but maybe a lot of these things sort of just evolved and like miraculously fit together in the end. But that's I think, amazing thing about life, that as things are happening, you're like, oh my gosh, this is crazy, like this is the worst thing ever, right? But often, like, even though we're like having so much angst and pain in the moment, often we'll look back and laugh at the situation. It's often those the most the craziest times, the most painful times, that create the most awesome and theatrical and stories that that to laugh about in the end.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Olivia will probably want to edit this next part out. Speaking of bloopers, I keep muting myself because my neighbors across the hall somebody sounds very sick, so I didn't want to keep the microphone to pick that up.
We're living in a post blooper world. I think the whole pandemic, there was so much lo-fi content that it was being distributed online and on the with from like the greatest from the greatest actors and singers and producers and writers and like I think what to me encapsulates this idea, I don't remember the actor's name. He was in The Office, and he decided to do like a a Zoom news show, a lo-fi Zoom news show, and so he's like telling these crazy stories and pretending to be like an official news show, and then at the end of the show he gets up and he's only wearing his underwear. So like you can't I mean, he's got like the suit on here, but like the underwear down here, and I feel like there's like and that's become more acceptable these days. Like before the pandemic, everybody wanted everything to be perfect, and the problem with perfection is that it doesn't allow for evolution, and
humanity.
I think what doesn't allow for humanity. And I think one of the most challenging problems I feel like in this generation is that there's no room for forgiveness. There's no room for allowing people to make mistakes. Not that the people need to be accountable for their mistakes, but there has to be forgiveness as well. So there's so much cancel culture today. It doesn't allow for a person's past, and that is unfortunate because that's the whole reason why we're here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think the pandemic really showed, I think the world that none of us are perfect. Like everything's been airbrushed, everything's been polished and edited, and but like when we were all in this pandemic together and everybody's zooming from their bedrooms and their living rooms, and like you got a little peek behind the scenes.
Yeah. And I feel like you're actually answering my other question that I wanted to ask you, which is what generally, like what do you hope audiences will take away from watching this? It seems like a message of forgiveness and redemption is one of those things.
Great question. I guess, I mean, I would imagine each person is going to take away something, different. They might, I think each of us are going through our own, trials and tribulations. And I hope it speaks to, people no matter where they are. I think there's a lot to offer in that way. But I think ultimately, I think one of the most important themes of the album is to not only forgive one another, but to forgive ourselves.
Mm.
To, you know, we're so, I, at least from, you know, one of my, you know, challenge, one of my, I have so many. Where do I begin? One of my personal challenges is, you know, I have like a really harsh inner critic. Another reason why it took so long for this, you know, project to see the light of day. And not only, you know, for my my creative projects, but my personal life as well. And, you know, often, you know, in my mind, there's no room for failure. And I hold myself, you know, it's like I said before, it's important to hold oneself accountable, but it's also, you know, important to recognize that we're human and fallible, and that's okay. It's okay not to be okay. And it's okay not to be okay with not being okay. So
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I think we're about out of time. But I just wanted to ask you, is there anything that we didn't get a chance to talk about that you wanted to talk about?
life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, space exploration,
That's for the
space-time
next
the
rock opera.
space-time continuum, multiple realities. I said before, I think you're much more interesting than I am, and that I should be interviewing you. But thank you so much for taking the time to interview me.
It has been my pleasure.
Shalom, shalom, peace.
Shalom.